What's up everybody, I'm Matt Gary and welcome to the Lightning Web Component Masterclass. In this first episode of the class, you and I are just going to go over the basics of Lightning Web Components. We'll figure out what they are, when to use them, why to use them, the difference between an Aura component and a Lightning Web component, and last, but certainly not least, we'll create a Lightning Web component together so that you get to build your own component for the very first time. With all that said, we've got a lot to get through, so let's get to it. All right, everybody, welcome to the very first episode of the Lightning Web Component Masterclass. In this first episode, we're just going to go over the basics. We're going to find out what Lightning Web Components are, when to use them, why to use them, the difference between Aura and Lightning, and build our own Lightning Web component together. So it's gonna be a good time. Don't pause the video. You gotta finish this one. You're gonna love it. Let me tell you. Anyway, before we get into all that wonderful magic, though, make sure if you like this video, if you actually enjoy this video, to like it, because when you do, it helps this video get out to more people just like yourself that want to learn this stuff for free too. And if you really enjoy these videos, consider supporting the channel either by becoming a paid member or scheduling some consultation time with me or just donating via PayPal. It's much appreciated, but always not necessary. I make these videos for free so that everybody can have access to this content. So, with that said, now that all my promotional garbage is out of the way, let's get into the fun stuff, which is, what are Lightning Web Components? Well, if we go to Salesforce's own documentation, they describe Lightning Web Components as custom HTML, I zoomed in too much, custom HTML elements built using HTML and JavaScript, which, while accurate, does not give you the best picture of what a Lightning Web Component truly is. So let's take a look together in Salesforce at what a Lightning Web Component is. And by the way, if you don't know how to set up and use your own Salesforce org, don't worry. I have a video for that, and I'll pop it up in the, right up above. There will be a link. Check it out. So that way you can kind of follow along with me while we are building things together. So you never worked in Salesforce before, you never stood up your own Salesforce org. Very simple, super quick. Got a video going over it. So check it out. And then come back here and we'll do some fun stuff together. Okay, so I'm in Salesforce right now, and in Salesforce, when you create pages, you have a lot of out-of-the-box options to, build what you want to build, or display your data in the way you want to display it. So, for instance, everything that you see right now in front of you is all out-of-the-box Salesforce stuff, right? It looks like Salesforce. It's nice looking, but it's got that Salesforce look and feel to it. Now, say, for instance, you wanted on this out-of-the-box page to either make it look different or give it some features that it doesn't currently have. For instance, one feature that was requested of me a long time ago is for text fields. Every text field has a certain amount of characters that you allow for it. Could you put counting below it? Could you tell the user how many characters they have left at any given point in time? And the answer to that is, with out-of-the-box stuff, you cannot. Whether that's flows or pre-built components that Salesforce just allows you to drag and drop into the page, you can't. But with a Lightning Web Component, I built a character counter, which allows you to look at something that looks very similar to this, right? It looks very, very similar, but it adds on this magical character counter. So now if I went in here and I started typing, you can see it counts down all the way until we get to 0, and it's super useful. But this is a reason why you might create a Lightning Web Component, because it's you need to extend some out-of-the-box functionality that Salesforce just does not provide to you. So that's one reason. Another one is maybe you want to make something incredibly stupid like I made, or in reality you'd make something more useful. Like this GME ticker that I made a long time ago. If you don't know, that's the GameStop stock symbol that I made years ago when GameStop was going buck wild. I made a video about it. It's a waste of time, but you ever want to check it out. So this, for instance, is a custom Lightning Web Component that I built in a couple hours to show me Wall Street bets posts in Reddit, and the current GME stock price and stuff like that. So you basically want to use Lightning Web Components to build custom user interface elements that Salesforce is not going to provide for you. And you will find as a developer that your users will inevitably need these things for one reason or another. Maybe it's an integration to an external system that, to get the user interface and look and feel that you want, you need to use a Lightning Web Component. Maybe it's something as simple as that character counter, even though I'll tell you the character counter was not super simple. But it's all of these little things, right? You need a UI element that your users cannot just get from point-and-click mechanisms in Salesforce. So that's why Lightning Web Components exist. That's what they are. Now the next question is, all right, Matt, there's many other mechanisms to make UI elements, or at least a couple primary mechanisms to make UI elements in Salesforce. When should I use a Lightning Web Component over, say, a flow? Or if you're one of the handful of developers that are using OmniStudio and OmniScripts, when should I use a Lightning Web Component instead of an OmniScript? And the answer to that question is really similar to what we just kind of talked about, in that, if I was going to make a flow, right, there's only so much I can do with a flow for user interface elements. So we took a look at that and created a new flow. There's a lot that you can do, and my suggestion would be to start with the flow if you're unsure and see how far you can get. And then if you can't get what you need, move on to Lightning Web Components. So if I came in here and put a screen for my screen flow, for instance, if I wanted to drop an address in here and maybe a date field or something, then I can do that, right? It's just drag and drop UI elements. But what if I want to make this not look like a flow, What if I want to make a form or something on my page that doesn't look and feel quite as Salesforce-y or flow related, which you're going to run into a lot, especially if you work in Experience Cloud sites and other things to that extent. When you get to a situation in which you want a custom user interface element that doesn't look and feel and navigate like a screen flow would, then you need to kind of move on to Lightning Web Components, right? So screen flows are great, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they just don't give that kind of modern look and feel, or the business's look and feel that they're trying to give to their customers, right? The kind of user interface that they want their customers to use. So that's the main thing. Now, one thing to point out here in flows is that flows can actually have Lightning Web Components dropped onto them. And you can use, for instance, my character counter component on a flow. And what we will see in later videos is that flows combined with LWCs are actually super useful and can really simplify your workflow if you kind of figure out how to do that, because it's a little bit, truthfully, it's a little bit confusing the first time you do it. Because most of the time that you're going to do this, and it's going to give you a huge benefit, is when you're doing pagination, at least in my opinion. Other people have plenty of other opinions, I'm sure, but I think that's one of the best use cases for flows with LWCs. So you can use them in tandem, and sometimes they're really, really helpful. Now, one other thing to just point out about flows is that they can also load a little slower. So if you need an extremely performant user interface, flows are probably not the way to go, because when you load in a flow, it loads in all of the flow framework that it needs to operate, right? Whereas a Lightning Web Component isn't going to do that, because everything, I shouldn't say everything, most of what it needs to run, what Salesforce needs to run a Lightning Web Component, already exists in your browser, because it's part of just web standards that your browser encapsulates. So, also important to know, if you need really, really, really performant Lightning Web Components, really, really performant user interface, flows might not be the best choice. Might not. Not to say you can't have really poorly performing Lightning Web Components, but hopefully, if you need to optimize performance, you're building your Lightning Web Components right. Okay, now the next question is, for those of you that have Omni Studio and are using Omni Scripts, when should you use Omni Scripts instead of LWCs? And the first thing here to note is I don't have, just like probably 80 to 90% of orgs in existence, I don't have OmniScript in this org. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, it's probably because it's not a feature that comes with Salesforce for free, right? OmniScript you have to pay extra money for, unless they come bundled in your cloud, like Industries Cloud or whatever. But OmniScripts are kind of a drag and drop way of creating UIs that are a lot more advanced than flows. So that said, there are definitely things that OmniScripts can't do, which is why, just like flows, for OmniScripts you can import LWCs. So it's the same kind of story for OmniScripts, even though there are fewer scenarios, I suppose, where you'll run into OmniScripts being unable to build the user interface that you want. You're still going to get into that quite a bit, right? So just take that into consideration, and do what you will with it. The other thing is, I mean, who wants to write OmniScripts? I'm sorry, Salesforce. If you've worked with them, I mean, I don't know. They're fine, but I like Lightning Web Components better. That said, now we've covered, a couple things. When to use a Lightning Web Component. Again, that's when you need a more advanced user interface element that Salesforce does not offer to you out of the box. When to use them, when to use them, what they are, their UI. I'm getting confused now. The first thing that we covered is what they are. They're ways to create more advanced user interface elements that Salesforce doesn't provide out of the box. When to use them, when screen flows just won't work. The UI for screen flows are not what your users or your stakeholders for your business want. And now, the next thing we should go over is, why would you use Lightning Web Components instead of Aura components or Visualforce, if you're familiar with that, even though, most people probably these days less and less are. So, if you're unfamiliar, there are two branches of Lightning components, or I don't know, categories. So when you Google Lightning components, just Lightning components, you'll find that there are Aura components and there are Lightning Web Components. And a lot of people are confused, I think, why there are both of them. And let me tell you, I've been a developer through the whole thing, so I'm happy to share that information with you. Here's the deal, basically. So back when Salesforce switched from Classic, the Magical Classic, which I gotta say I still love. I probably shouldn't admit that here. But when Salesforce switched from Classic to Lightning Experience, they also introduced Lightning components, which are now referred to as Aura components. And when they made this switch, web standards were very, very different, as in what comes pre-baked into your browser, what functionality is available in your browser. And so back then, when they built this, what was common for not just Salesforce, but other tech stacks as well, is that you built what was referred to as a framework on top of your, or basically to push into your browser to give it all the functionality that it needed for you to be able to build the apps that you wanted to build. And Salesforce actually has a really, really good explanation of all of this on its site, and I'm going to link that in the description so that you can read all this yourself if you're really, really interested. But Aura components, the older version, or the older version of Lightning Web Components, Aura components, were built during this time in which web standards in your browser didn't include things like templates, modules, all this kind of stuff, right, that we see right here. And I know that this is confusing. Don't worry too much about it. None of this is super important, but I wanted to give you the background if you're interested. Aura components were built during a time where all of this stuff basically had to be built into a framework, or the Aura framework in the case of Salesforce, and then pushed into your browser, loaded into the browser. However, since then, since it was created in 2014, as you can see here, web standards changed drastically, and what is immediately available to you in your browser, right, via web standards, is completely different now. So you don't have to build one of those complex frameworks that loads in all of these types of things like web components and templates and custom elements. Instead, you just have to create a framework that's much lighter weight that kind of sits on top of that to give you your specialized services and whatnot. So that is why there's Aura and then there's LWCs, because Aura was built in that older world of the internet, and Lightning Web Components were built in this newer world with better web standards and more functionality, just kind of pre-baked into your browser. So the question is, now that you know that, when would you, why do Aura components even exist anymore? Why do we still use them? Are there any use cases where you would still want to use an Aura component instead of a Lightning Web Component? And the answer to that question is yes, there are a handful of reasons why you would want to use an Aura component instead of a Lightning Web Component, but they are extremely scarce. So probably these days, 5 years into the future from when Lightning Web Components were introduced, 98% of the time you're going to be using Lightning Web Component. However, there are certain situations in which that is not true. For instance, there are still a handful of features that Lightning Web Components don't provide that Aura components do. And while this is an outdated example, because you can actually do this now, for a very, very, very long time, way too long of a time in my opinion, Lightning Web Components couldn't open new tabs in a service console. So if I went over here and I closed this, right, and I clicked this, that's called creating a new tab in a service console. And Lightning Web Components couldn't do this for 4 years at least after they were introduced. So you used to have to use an Aura component for that. And there are still situations in which Aura components are the only available option, although that's really slim in comparison to what it has been historically. So every once in a while you're going to run into some kind of feature that you want to provide that unfortunately Lightning Web Components still don't really support. The other thing that's even rarer, that honestly I probably shouldn't even go over now, is that every once in a while you run into difficulty with a third-party JavaScript library, like some kind of Google library, for instance, that needs to load into the page and have access to your component in the DOM, the document object model, which we're going to go over in the next episode here, so stick with me. And interact with that component. Now, with Lightning Web Components, as you can see in this documentation, they use what's referred to as a shadow DOM, which we will go over in much more depth in just a couple episodes, two episodes, I think. We'll see. Don't quote me on that. And sometimes that just is not quite possible. Right? I mean, this is rare, but you will get into that situation. So every once in a while, because Aura components load into the normal DOM instead of a shadow DOM, which if you have no idea what that is, please don't worry. We're going to go over it in much more detail in the next couple episodes, so don't worry. You might have to use an Aura component in that instance, but again, rare situation. So 98% of the time, you're going to be using a Lightning Web Component. Okay, cool. So we've gone over what they are, user interface elements that Salesforce doesn't provide that you need to provide to your users, when to use them, when flows or OmniScripts just won't fit the bill for the UI that you're trying to put out, and then why you'd use them over Aura and Visualforce, because those are built on older standards, and really Lightning Web Components are in your best interest to use because they load faster. They're, when you build them, you're going to be using, more typical JavaScript styling these days. So, yeah, it's in your best interest to use Lightning Web Components, more or less. Now, with that said, it's time to get to the fun part, finally. I don't know how long it's been. It feels like it's been 20 minutes, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to talk as fast as I can, truthfully. I want to get this all in here. Let's build a Lightning Web Component together. So the first thing that we need to do to build a Lightning Web Component is you have to download and install and use an IDE, or an integrated development environment, because if you're still one of the handful of developers that are using the developer console and have never created a Lightning Web Component before, you cannot create a Lightning Web Component in here. There's a Lightning component, but that's an Aura component. So, can't create them in the developer console. You've got to create them in an IDE. And so, what you'll need to do is download and install an IDE like Visual Studio Code. And if you've never done this before, you've never seen an IDE, you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, don't worry about it. I've got a video for that I made long ago. So I will link it up here. You can check it out. And once you're done setting up and installing Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ, which is my preferred IDE, I'm not going to lie to you. I use this one because I know it's free and it's easier for everybody else to use. So once you've got your IDE set up after you watch that video, come on back here and we'll create a Lightning Web Component together. So once you've done that, you've followed my whole tutorial, you've got your IDE set up, you're connected to your Salesforce instance in your IDE, Next, we're going to create a Lightning Web Component. And we're going to do that by bringing up the command palette in Visual Studio Code. And to do that, on a Windows computer, you're going to hit Control-Shift-P. On a Mac, you're going to do Command-Shift-P. Same idea. And we're going to run this command called Create Lightning Web Component. So you'll click that, and we'll just enter in a name. So we'll say Demo Component or something. And a couple things you need to make sure you do here, while my dog gets upset at the world, is make sure that the first letter of your component is lowercase, and that you're not putting any spaces in here. The only special character that you can add on in here is an underscore if you'd like to. So we'll create our demo component, and I'm just going to put it in the default directory that's created here, but you can use a custom directory if you'd like. That's just the folder that you put your LWCs in, you know. For some reason, the development world likes to say directory. I'm sure there are other places too, but it's just a folder on your desktop. Okay, so now, let me close all this other junk I've got open. Now we've got a Lightning Web Component, and we made it that quick, and it's here. But right now, there's nothing in this component. So let's just do one really fun thing really quick to build a Lightning Web Component. So the first thing we're going to do is create what's referred to as a class property, which is very similar to a variable, and we'll go over the differences later. But for right now, what we're going to do is create a class property, and we'll call it Hello World, and we'll set it equal to Hello World, like so. So this is just a string, and if you don't know what this is right now, don't worry about it. There's going to be a lot of videos where we go over the basics of JavaScript and all this other stuff. I just wanted to have a little fun in this first episode and create a really, really simple component together. So this is all you need to write in your JavaScript file, right? Just hello world equals hello world. Actually, let's make it funner and do like hello world, like so. And then I'm going to hit Control S to save it, or again on Mac, slap that command button. Command S instead of Control S. And then we're going to go over to the HTML file. And in here, I'm just going to do something real simple. I'm going to create a paragraph tag. That's what that P tag is for. And then we're going to do what's called binding in Lightning Web Components and in other, text tags. And what we'll do is we'll take this variable name, hello world. We'll just copy it, keep it real simple. Bring that over here. And then I made these too fast. Let me explain. So we'll put brackets to kind of indicate to our template here that we're trying to bring in a variable from our JavaScript. And then we'll put our variable name in between those brackets, hello world. And that's it. That's all we're going to do right now. Really, really simple. We've basically added 2 lines of code. The one other thing that we'll need to do is open up our XML file and add some XML in here. And we're going to change this to true for is exposed so that we can use this Lightning Web Component in the app builder. So place it on a record page or an app page or something like that. And then we're going to do, I think it's targets, and then target. Oh, I got it right. I tell you, this is so autocomplete for me in IntelliJ. I honestly forget most of the time what it is. So, and then we're going to put a target of Lightning record page. So what this is doing here in the XML is saying, all right, we want to allow this Lightning Web Component to be placed on a Lightning record page, right? Which we'll look at what a Lightning record page here in just a second. And we're going to save this XML, and it'll deploy to the org. Now, if for some reason you're saving this, you didn't follow my whole tutorial, and this is not saving automatically to your org, you can always right-click on this folder that is the name of your Lightning Web Component, and then do deploy this source to org, like so. The other thing you can do is you can go down here to Preferences, Preferences, Extensions, Preferences, Settings, rather, and then go down to your extensions in here, and then in your Salesforce one, you can change a couple settings, which I swear it was up here. You know, this is why the video exists. There is a checkbox in here that will allow you to, on Control S when you save your thing, to be able to automatically deploy it to your org. So it's down here somewhere. I'm sure I've just got to scroll for a while. There it is. Push or deploy on save enabled. Just click this bad boy and you'll be good to go. Okay, so we've got that in our org now, believe it or not. It's in there. And now what we're going to do is we are going to go to our account page. So we are on an account right now. And what I'm going to do is go up here and click Edit Page. So I can go to the Lightning record page, or Lightning App Builder, to edit this record page. And if this loads someday, could be today, it could be tomorrow, you never know with the app builder. Once this loads, we're going to look for our demo component, the one that we just built together, and we're going to slap that bad boy on the page wherever we want. And we can see that now Hello World is there. And if we save this and go back to the page we were just on, what we should see, hopefully, is that Hello World is up here, which is spectacular. And now, you know, if we want to come back to our component and we just decided, you know, I don't want to say Hello World anymore. I want it to say Taco Bell is that hot fire, bruh. Then we can, and we'll save that. And once this bad boy runs, we'll open back up our browser, hard refresh our page, Control-Shift-R to hard refresh. And then it says, Taco Bell is that hot fire, bruh. And there you go. And that's it. And now you've made your first Lightning Web Component, which is probably a really horrible use case for a Lightning Web Component, but you've made one now. And now that you've made one, there's no turning back. You got to keep going now, because it only gets funner from here. But anyway, that's the basics of Lightning Web Components. You now know what they are, when to use them, why to use them, and most importantly, how to make one. So, if you're still here with me, congratulations. And you know, stick with me, because in the next episode we're going to go over, well, you know what, before I even get into what the next episode is, we're going to go over in this class everything. I mean, from the basics of HTML, to the basics of CSS, to the basics of JavaScript, to the basics of Lightning Web Components, and so on and so forth, until you have all of the skills necessary to be a really successful Lightning Web Component developer. And we'll go over lots of the advanced things too, like all the different APIs that you can use with Lightning Web Components, advanced caching techniques, building things for mobile applications, stuff along those lines. So stick with me. It'll be a good time. And the next episode, we're going to start with those HTML basics with what's a DOM and what's a shadow DOM. And maybe I'll throw in some other DOM stuff too, because there's some new stuff with Lightning Web Security, which just, you know, don't worry about it. We're going to go over all the simple stuff, and then all this other stuff that makes no sense is going to make sense. So I'm glad you stuck with me if you did, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, though, you know, go get some Taco Bell. That's what I'm going to be doing. Anyway, I'll see you all later.